Welcome to Missouri Law Matters, a podcast all about your Missouri courts. My name is Matt Hamner. I'm a judge on the Missouri Court of Appeals in the Southern District. Thank you for being here today. If you've been enjoying our podcast and the episodes and the content that we've been putting out, don't forget to like and subscribe on all of your platforms of choice, wherever you find your podcast, Spotify, Apple. We're also making the video available on YouTube, so don't forget to go there and like and subscribe as well. Also, don't forget to follow the Missouri Supreme Court and the Missouri courts on all of our social media pages, including Facebook, Instagram, and everywhere else that you can find us on social media. I'm really excited today about the episode that we have teed up for you. This pod, when we started it, is all about telling stories about the people who make up our judiciary. I always enjoy talking specifically in this process to newer judges who have either just come on the bench or who recently come on the bench, because they always have a really unique and fresh perspective on our judiciary and kind of how it comes to be and how it affects their lives. And today I'm excited to talk to one of our newer judges in the state of Missouri to find out how she's finding the job, a little bit about what brought her to the bench, and a little bit about what she thinks the future holds for her court. I am honored to be joined today by Associate Circuit Judge Denise Childress from the 11th Circuit up in St. Charles County, Missouri. Judge Childress, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be a guest on this podcast. I'm really excited about today.
Well, good. I am glad to hear that and very excited to get to talk to you. As I said, you're one of our newer Associate Circuit judges in the state. Tell our listeners a little bit about when you became a judge and kind of what you've been doing the last year or so.
Absolutely. Yeah, I like to call myself I'm still a baby judge a little bit. I now have about 8 months under my feet, though, so that's good. Back in October, I was lucky enough that Governor Parson appointed me to be an associate judge here in St. Charles County, the 11th Judicial Circuit. I took the bench January 2nd of 2025. So I've been here for about, I guess almost 9 months now. Wow. And so my dockets are just a little bit of everything. I know that you've had a few of these episodes on, so I'm sure your viewers are familiar, but as you know, associate circuit judges handle some of the lower level criminal offenses, some of the lower dollar civil cases, and some of the other types of civil cases. So my docket, I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I was assigned to have the pro se family law docket. So if you don't have any lawyers, you come to me. I'm the family law judge that you'll see here in our county. I also oversee the small claims docket. I have the orders of protection docket as well. I do criminal non-support. I oversee expungements of any prior criminal convictions that you are statutorily eligible, to have expunged. I also oversee the structured settlement docket. And then, of course, my big civil law docket where we have landlord-tenant disputes, we have contract disputes, we have any civil matter that's under $25,000. So kind of a little bit of almost everything is what I've been sitting on these last 9 months.
That's outstanding. And I'll tell you, having been an associate circuit judge previously, I understand the mix of things that you get and the crazy variety of the different types of cases that you tend to handle. But I also know that in the 11th Circuit up in St. Charles County, that all of those various things, it sounds like a lot of different things you're covering, but I also know that each one of those things carries with it a large number of cases. How have you found handling the volume of cases that you will see in a large jurisdiction like the 11th Circuit in St. Charles County?
That's a really great question. First, I want to start by saying that we have a really wonderful bench here in St. Charles County. We have 15 judges and 1 commissioner, and we work together very well. So, of course, every judge has to make their own decisions. You can't abdicate your thoughts and decisions, but I have found a lot of mentors on our bench. And so while I'm learning the process of these new types of areas of law that I learned about in law school, but I need a little bit of refreshers on, I have found a lot of open doors and judges that I can go sit down and say, hey, what's the thought process here? What's the analysis? How do I approach this? And so that has helped me sort of get up to speed while dealing with a large number of cases on my dockets. As far as dealing with the large number of cases on my dockets, my Friday docket, I can have sometimes up to 200 cases on one day. And a lot of people, when I tell them that, they say, how do you do that? And my answer is always very carefully, because every case is a person, right? We have litigants on both sides. There are people on both sides. And every case really affects the everyday lives of these individuals. So I always try to remember that first and foremost so that I slow down even if there's a large volume, I want to slow down and make sure that everybody is heard and I'm considering every case individually. A lot of that comes with docket preparation. And so I think I've come to be known as the judge that gets in really early and leaves really late until I kind of got the habit of how to view these cases under my belt. And so I look at every case before my docket to get up to speed with what's going on. It's tough, but I'm blessed that I have been given a very good work ethic, and it's what our citizens deserve.
That's great. And I'm glad to hear you say that, because it's something that I've often preached to young judges and to attorneys too, even when I was a practicing attorney, that we do have large dockets. We will have dockets with hundreds of cases on them. And it's easy to think of each case that comes in front of you as just the next one that you need to knock off to get done through the day. And I always encourage lawyers, and I'm really glad to hear you say how important it is each case, because that case is the most important case in the world to those people that are involved in it.
Absolutely.
And even though it's just one of 200 we may have, we have to remember that to the people that come in front of us, that is the most important case in the world. And we need to make sure that we're treating it with that respect and with that understanding and mindset. So that's wonderful to hear. Judge Childress, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for a little while. I knew you when you were an attorney in private practice before you took the bench. So I'm a little familiar with kind of your backstory, but our listeners probably aren't. I always like to talk to people about kind of the path that they took to get not only to the bench, but also to the law in general, and kind of the path that they walked that kind of brought them into the legal profession and then ultimately to the bench. So let's start with, what can folks learn about where you're from and how you got started, and what is it that walked you into becoming a lawyer and wanting to be involved in the law?
My story is kind of a long one, so I will give you the abridged version. But
Well, the
growing
good
up,
news is podcast format. We have no time restrictions, so you're welcome to take as much time as you like. It's up to you.
that's good. That's good. As a very young child, I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, and I loved reading Nancy Drew. And so I always wanted to be a detective. And in undergrad, I studied the criminal justice system. That was my major. And I always thought I would go into policing or corrections or possibly detective work. But as one does in your college years, when you're making those decisions of where you want to move and what you want your future to look like, I knew that's very noble work. I really do respect law enforcement and what they have to do on the road, because I consider doing it. I know I can't do it. So the other kind of path with justice systems is going into law school. I went to Truman State University. I was a varsity soccer player. I walked on my freshman year, so I redshirted. I expected to spend 5 years there, but spring of my fourth year, I was injured. So it was either graduate early but on time, kind of as a surprise, or stay a fifth year and not play soccer. So I graduated before I anticipated and applied to law school about 30 days after the deadline to apply to law school. So that was kind of scary. I got waitlisted. I guess my first touch with the legal system in the real world, my senior year, one of my projects was to intern at the public defender's office. The very first case that I walked into, the very first day, my client had actual innocence, not just mistake or the crime never happened, wasn't even there, just completely made up. The person recanted later. And so I was really instrumental in helping him win his freedom. And after that case, I was shocked. And so I knew I'd go to law school. Just when, after I graduated, I was waitlisted. So I was interning at the public defender's office in St. Louis City. And I'll never forget the day I got a call. I almost didn't take it, from an unknown number. And I answered, I said, "This is Denise." And he says, "Oh, this is Dean Barris from SLU Law. Are you still wanting to go to law school?" I said, "Sure, I guess." And he said, "Great, we start in 2 weeks." So that's kind of how I stumbled into law school.
Lots of time to plan.
Yeah, lots of time to plan, just kind of pivot. That's been the story of my life, really, is you just got to learn to say yes and be open to any opportunities that come your way. So I went to law school, graduated. The other story I like to tell, especially for young lawyers or maybe law students who might be watching this podcast, is how I got my first job. So when I graduated law school and I was studying for the bar, I wasn't one of those students that had a job lined up. Once I took the bar, I hadn't even passed yet, but I was kind of sitting on the couch, sending out resumes, and I realized I don't want to just sit around and wait for a job to find me. So I called an attorney that I had met during one of my internships, cold called him and said, "Hey, can I take you out to lunch and pick your brain about your line of work?" He said, "Yeah, let's do it on Friday." He calls, says, "I'm running late, stuck in court." He cancels. I said, "Okay, let's reschedule." He canceled probably about 2 or 3 times before I said, "Well, if you're just in court, you have to eat, right? And I'm interested in court. So why don't I meet you at the courthouse? I'll shadow you and then I'll take you to lunch whenever you have to eat. So I shadowed him all day one day and he said, okay, well, do you just want to come back same time tomorrow? I was like, yeah, sounds good. So I shadowed him every day in court for about a week. And I saw how overwhelmed he was because lawyers, solo practitioners especially, get overwhelmed. And he had some big issues he was working on. I said, hey, do you want me to research that for you? I know how to research. Like I can do a memo on that for you. He's like, yeah, why don't you come back to my office? So then after about a month of me doing that, he says, I guess I should like give you a paycheck, right? So that's how I worked my way into my first job in my legal career. I'm like, I guess you can pay me if you want. So when I talk about my work ethic earlier here at the courthouse, that's kind of always been with me of, you know, things aren't handed to you in life. You got to go get them. So then I ended up working in a different place long term. My first kind of real job was with the public defender system down in Farmington. And then my partner, one of my greatest mentors, scooped me up, Carl Ward. I worked with him and for him for a couple years before opening my own practice in 2019 here in St. Charles County. I didn't expect that I would take the bench so soon. I always thought maybe my end goal would be being a judge or being a professor because I'm a nerd and I really like learning and I really like teaching. I had a couple people in my life kind of take me aside. Hey, have you thought about being a judge? We think you'd be a good judge. So I started seriously considering it. And in St. Charles County, we had a large turnover of our bench in a very short amount of time. And so I really felt called to step up now, even though it's kind of early in my career, to say, we want to make sure we have good people on our bench that have good morals and integrity and can really remain impartial and look at both sides of things. And so I felt called to leave my practice behind and start trying for an appointment. And I'm so blessed and glad that Governor Parsons saw something in me. And he appointed me, like I said, back in October, and here I am today.
That's really interesting. And of course, as I said, I knew a little bit about your background, but I love that you tell the story about how, discovered law late. We have lots of people on the pod and we always talk about the journey and to the law. And I think that some people get the impression in the public that, if you become a judge or a lawyer, it's something you've wanted to do your whole life and it was kind of your life's calling, but it's really not true. And I think that the more common story is like yours in that, people find the law later. It's not necessarily the first thing they think of or they dream of when they're a kid, but they find it later in school or at some point down the road. You can find your passion for it. You're not necessarily born with it. You can inherit it. You can find it as you're kind of making your way through. And I love to hear that story. And I love to hear stories like that of people who found the law and it became a passion for them after they had some experience with it. It's also great that you're one of the first people that I've met who basically created their own legal job. That's great.
It's one of my favorite stories. I want to encourage people that might not have connections or think that they don't have connections that you can make your own way. You just have to be assertive and you just have to not necessarily fake it till you make it, but you belong and you just have to put yourself in the place to belong.
Absolutely. There's no question about that. And we've talked a lot on this pod with other guests and you've mentioned it as today as well about how important it is to have mentors, especially in the legal profession. It is not a profession that you can just pick up a book or read an article on the internet and know how to be a lawyer. You really have to talk to and work with someone who's got some experience who can kind of show you the ropes and give you tips and advice for making sure that those first few years of practice are not nearly as rough as they need to be, that they can help you with that. And part of that is being willing to find those folks. Some lawyers are blessed in that they come out and they go to work for a firm where there's multiple lawyers and there's kind of mentors that are built into that relationship. But a lot more lawyers these days are coming out and they're setting up their own shop and hanging up their own shingle without anybody else to really turn to and talk. And I always tell those folks and encourage those folks, look, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call and talk to somebody that you know or have met. I have never known a lawyer. I haven't met one yet. I'm sure they exist. I'm sure they're out there, but I haven't met one yet who would not take the time to speak with a young lawyer and talk to them about the practice and give them some tips and advice as to how they can be a better lawyer because someone did that for them. And that's part of our profession and the giving back and making sure that knowledge gets passed down because it's beneficial to all of us. The better all the lawyers that we have are, the better it is for all of us in our profession.
Absolutely. And I mentioned one of my mentors, Carl Ward. One of his mentors was Bernie Edelman. And he taught all the lawyers that he mentored that same mentality of I'm gonna open the door for you. And how can you repay me? The way you can repay me is mentoring the next generation, right? If a young lawyer calls you, you answer that phone. And so Carl, would always give out his cell phone, and all of the paralegal staff, myself included, had the direction that if it's a judge or a lawyer calling, you give them my cell phone and I will take that call. I can agree with you about we are only as good as our weakest link. And it's incumbent in the bar, especially the older bar or the more experienced bar, to pass it down to the younger lawyers. And that's part of where I got my passion for teaching from, because that's another thing Carl kind of instilled in me is, look, I understand that the legal field is a competitive market, but there's enough cases to go around. And so I always wanted to make sure things were done properly, they were done correctly. And one of the ways to do that is teaching other lawyers how you're supposed to do it, or teaching law enforcement. So I also, in my former days, I taught at various police academies, including the Missouri State Highway Patrol Academy, because I just want to make sure everything's done right. Right? We want to make sure that our rights are respected, that the rules are followed, and everyone knows what they're supposed to be doing so they can get it right in the moment. And that's kind of where some of that passion came from too.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was the next thing I wanted to talk to you about. You had mentioned that you had a passion for teaching and that you enjoyed teaching. And I know that before you became a judge, and I'm sure since you become a judge, you were very active in participating in projects and seminars, and you did a lot of work in teaching. What is it about teaching that you're really drawn to? What is it about that process and passing on that knowledge that really excites you?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's because I'm just a nerd. And so I like having to kind of relearn everything and refresh my own memory. And I find that teaching others is a really great way for me to learn things myself and retain it myself. But then the reason I like to teach others is somebody recently called me pedantic. Like, I have to get things right. The rules have to be followed. Things have to be done the correct way. And so that's why I like teaching others, is to say, hey, I could sit here and grumble that people aren't doing things properly, or why are lawyers doing this way, or why are law enforcement doing things that way? Or I could step up and say, hey, you just might not know. You may not know the training. And so I've been blessed to have mentors who taught me. So let me teach what I know and share my knowledge so that the law works properly for Missouri citizens, right? I mean, because that's what it all comes down to, is when a citizen has to hire a lawyer to represent them, we want to make sure they have good representation. We want to make sure they have lawyers who know what they're doing. If a citizen comes in contact with law enforcement, we want to make sure that law enforcement is doing what they're supposed to do, so that encounter is productive, so that rights aren't violated, the law is followed, and ultimately we end up making good cases and good arrests as well.
That's excellent. And, one of the things that you had mentioned in teaching and in reviewing your background and preparing for the pod, I noted that, and I know the firm that you used to work at did a lot of work in the area of DWIs and DUIs and things like that. That is a very specialized area of the law. That is an area that's kind of very scientific in nature. It can be very scientific in nature when you start talking about the issues that come in defending those types of cases. Is there something specific that drew you to that? Was that just the area of law that you were working in, that the firm put you in? Or was there something particular about handling cases of that type, those kind of scientific-y types of cases? Is that something that you were drawn to?
So a little bit of both. DWI is a unique area where there's a criminal case and a civil case. And so, as you well know, the majority of criminal cases end with a plea of some sort and don't go to trial or don't go to hearings. And so, oftentimes we don't see constitutional issues litigated very much in a criminal case. However, DWI is unique in the fact that it has a criminal component and a civil component, where the Missouri Department of Revenue is seeking to suspend the driver's license. And during that civil component, if you do nothing at all, the Department of Revenue takes the person's license. If you do everything possible under the sun, hire every expert, have a 3-day trial, and you are unsuccessful, the Department of Revenue takes the person's license. So essentially, there's no disincentive for exercising your rights, essentially, in the civil side. And because of that, I actually got to litigate, what does the Fourth Amendment look like? What does the right to an attorney look like? I actually got to litigate the Constitution every day and make some good case law to where other citizens' Fourth Amendment rights and rights could be respected, or at least we knew what that analysis looked like, because the first element in a civil DWI is, what is probable cause? Was there probable cause to arrest? So the second part of that is, Yes, I am a science nerd as well. So when I graduated early, I had two minors I was working on that I ultimately abandoned, and one of those was biology. The other was psychology. But I really love the scientific aspect of a DWI because even just the pre-arrest standardized field sobriety testing can be rather scientific. But the post-arrest breath testing, pre-arrest breath testing, post-arrest blood testing, the lab analysis, all of that is so detailed and scientific. And it just really piques my interest to make sure that if we have evidence that we are going to rely on to take a citizen's rights away or take their freedom away, that it's good scientific evidence because we want to make sure we're getting it right. And so we want to make sure that all the instruments are functioning properly and that the science is accurate. And I actually got to spend some time in one of the labs in Illinois learning how to run the gas chromatograph. And so the scientific aspect of it, as you can tell, I'm just a nerd for science and for education.
And it's great that you have that expertise. And our judiciary is littered with folks who have expertise in various different areas of the law. And it really brings a benefit to all of us as judges because we all get to interact, we all get to spend time together, and I get to learn from other judges who may know certain areas of the law better than I do. And I'm very excited that you're bringing your knowledge base to the court and to the judiciary because that's something that we'll all be able to have the benefit of. And I'm appreciative of that. Throughout that process, it sounds like you really enjoyed the litigation part of it, the being in the courtroom part of it. Obviously, being a lawyer in a courtroom is different than other areas of the law. But at some point, having that experience in the courtroom, you made the decision that you wanted to try to move over and be on the bench as opposed to being the lawyer in the courtroom. I know you had people that approached you about it and encouraged you to do it. What is it that inside of you? What is it in your heart that kind of directed you and said, you know what, this is something that I want?
That's a great question. I like to serve my community. I really like to give back. And in my previous practice, I could really represent one individual in each case. And through that representation, I always viewed my job as making sure that the rules were followed and that everybody did what they were supposed to do before you could come for my client. And so I could do that on an individualized basis. I like to be a devil's advocate. So even if I don't agree with the position, if I'm in a discussion with someone, I always would say, well, but have we considered this? And so I think those two things set me up with a unique ability to really keep an open mind to take the bench and look at both sides of everything. And in a broader sense, ensure that the system itself is functioning properly. As you mentioned, previously I was an advocate. I loved being in a courtroom. I loved representing my client and advocating for one side over the other. And taking the bench, of course, you have to take that advocate hat off. And now I'm just calling balls and strikes. I'm not really a participant anymore. But what my job is to make sure that the rules are being followed, to make sure that the system itself remains impartial, that everybody gets to have their day in court and be heard and really be heard on both sides.
With all of the cases that you're handling as an associate circuit judge there in the 11th Circuit, what is one thing that you think people would be the most surprised about if they come into your courtroom to watch one of your dockets, or if they're coming to your court for a case? You know, people see things on TV, they see movies portray how courts are going to be. What's the one thing you think people would be most surprised if they come to your courtroom to see a case?
That is another really great question. One of the things people may be surprised about when you come to my courtroom is there aren't really very many lawyers. And so I like to refer to myself as a judge of the people, big P, because most of my docket is the type of cases where there are pro se litigants or people that are representing themselves. So there may be a lawyer on the plaintiff's side sometimes, not all times. Like small claims cases, usually both sides are representing themselves. Oftentimes in the order of protection docket, the individuals are representing themselves. So I think probably the most surprising is walking in and seeing it's really a people's court where individuals are getting up and representing themselves. And so I think that's another important aspect of my current role and my current assignment is helping the litigants understand what to expect in court, keeping them comfortable enough to be able to voice their case, explaining the process to the extent I can, and just having them hopefully have a good day in court. Because that's the other thing we talked about a little bit earlier is nobody wants to come to court. I think they maybe said this in new judge school. You are dealing with people that are having their worst day. Every time they come to court, it might be that person's worst day because they're having to confront this case either as the plaintiff bringing it forward or petitioner bringing it forward to try to get redress, or as a defendant or respondent trying to say, whoa, I didn't do that, or that's not how this went, or this is why damages didn't result, or whatever that defense might be. Nobody wants to be there. And so you have to make sure that you keep it comfortable, you keep it as sunny as you can, help everybody have their day in court and be heard.
And that's really interesting to me because it ties into what we were just talking about. You're talking about the advocacy hat and having to take that advocacy hat on. That is especially true when you're dealing with pro se parties because, the difficulty becomes when parties don't have legal representation, they always have questions. They always have questions and they want help and they want some guidance. And as a judge, it's really difficult to balance the role that we have of arbiter and of umpire calling the balls and strikes, as you said, versus, helping somebody resolve their issues. How do you balance that? Is there a line that you draw, or how in your mind and within yourself do you balance those competing interests of trying not to be an advocate, trying not to overly help people who may have issues in front of you, but at the same time also explaining the process and making sure that folks' voices are being heard?
So first and foremost, the rules and the law. What do the rules say I'm allowed to do, and what does the law say I'm allowed to do? So there are some dockets, like a small claims docket, where the judge is given a duty to kind of sort through it a little bit and ask some questions a little bit. It's not like what we normally expect a legal case proceeding would be. The other guiding principle is that it's not fair for the judge to help one side over the other. And so you have to make sure that you're following the rules and the law to kind of parse out what the claim is, maybe ask a question or two without crossing that line. I always come back to, what does the law allow? What do the rules say I'm supposed to do? I was very lucky that I have mentors on the bench. Part of that is the Judicial Education Committee with New Judge School, connecting you across the state with other judges, other more seasoned judges.
That's great. And it's always interesting to me to hear judges talk about that because it is always one of the more difficult struggles that we have, coming from an area of advocacy and moving on to the bench where we're being neutral and being arbiters. And I think you have a really healthy perspective on it. So that's fabulous. Thank you for sharing that with us. You've been on the bench now for not quite a year. What are you excited about in the coming time that you have on the bench as a judge? What are you looking forward to?
I just look forward to continuing to work with the current docket assignment I have and having the individuals coming before me and helping them get resolutions for their cases on a day-to-day basis. We mentioned earlier that I'm a judge of the people, big P. I like that. I mean, I like the lawyers, of course. There's a benefit to being able to have a lawyer say, hey, brief that issue for me. But with the pro se litigants, I get to work directly with the people. I get to work directly with citizens that have an issue in their lives that need resolution. And so I continue to look forward to just doing that and serving my community in that way and having people in my courtroom that I get to meet. I hope, I've said this a lot in my civic groups with my friends, with family, my courtroom's open. All courtrooms are open, right? So my courtroom's open. So I hope in the future, more people will just come pop in and sit and watch court in action to kind of see what I get to do on a daily basis. It's very interesting that our society, true crime or true TV or court TV is so popular. It's happening in your own county. It's happening down the street. Just show up at a courthouse, find a courtroom and sit in it for a day. And you get to be kind of part of the human drama, the human element of your own area and your own county.
And I think that's a fabulous place to leave it today. Always inviting people to come see what we do. Our courts are always open. And we've said that on many pods up to this point. We're going to continue to say that. If you're curious about what Judge Childress does or what any of your judges do in the state of Missouri, don't ever hesitate to come down and see us. Our courts are open. I can't promise you it's going to be as exciting as Law and Order or any of those shows that you see on TV, but you will get to see how the process works and what it is that judges and lawyers and all the people involved with the court system do on a daily basis. Judge Childress, last question I have for you. I ask everybody this. It's just kind of my thing, and I'm sorry. What's the best thing that you have seen lately? It could be a movie or a TV show or a piece of art or a sunset or whatever it is. What's the best thing you've seen lately?
Well, Judge, have you ever seen a dragonfly hunt?
I have. I grew up at the Lake of the
have?
Ozarks, so we have a lot of big dragonflies like the size of Cessnas.
Yes. So I hadn't before. I have a lot of nature that I get to see every day. And one day I was looking out my bay window and I just saw a swarm of gnats or something around. and I just see this dragonfly dive bombing, and I'd never seen that before. I thought that was kind of cool. That's a cool thing I've seen recently.
The wonders of nature. Well,
The
Judge
wonders of
Childress,
nature.
again, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed getting to talk with you, and best of luck with everything going forward at the 11th Circuit.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me on today. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening. Hopefully you've made it this far. I hope you have a really great day, Jeff.
You too as well. And again, I also want to thank those folks who are listening and watching with us today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on all your various podcast areas of choice, as well as on YouTube and anywhere else that you're hearing our voices or seeing the video associated with this podcast. If there's something that you want us to talk about, if there's someone you'd like us to have on, drop us a comment, ask us a question. We always love to hear from folks who are listening to the pod and who are watching us on YouTube. And we always love to get feedback and interact with those folks. With nothing further to discuss today, I want to thank our guest, Judge Childress, once again. This podcast will be adjourned. Thank you, folks.